All right. Well, what a great group. Welcome. Welcome to today's talk, Dance to Change the World. It is so great to see all of you here. Such a nice combination of the Corbell family, the Newman Center family, and friends, as well as representatives of the Paul Taylor group that will be performing this evening. Very excited about that. My wife and I are going. I'm Fritz Mayer. I'm the Dean of the Corbell School. So welcome to our, those of you who haven't been here before, to this great room. We've got a wonderful view from here. This event is really part of a long history of work on cultural diplomacy, programming on cultural diplomacy at the Corbell School. And it's really been an important part of the Corbell School for many years. It's not something most schools of international affairs do that much on, and I think it's something we're really, really proud of. You know, it's often thought of, you know, international affairs is all about, you know, what's sort of the hard side of international relations. But the soft side matters too. There's a notion of soft power in international relations, and you know, really, you know, the importance of culture is really understated, and probably more so, you know, more important now than at any time I can remember, at a moment of incredible difference in the world. You know, the ability to cultural expression, to remind us of our common humanity, to enable us to appreciate the incredible diversity of expression, is really important. It can really lower the temperature, I think, and bring us together. And cultural expression can do more than that. It can also call our attention, and does call our attention, to what we call the great issues of our time, of social justice or climate change, or migration, the status of indigenous peoples, and on, all of these things that really matter in international affairs. So, well, this event is part of that history, and it's also, importantly, the launch of an expanded and more ambitious agenda, a joint project of the C. Chow Kang Center here at the Corbell School and the Newman Center, to really expand our work on cultural diplomacy and the role of the arts for social change. So this is something of a soft launch of the new program, and we're delighted to be doing even more with our dear friends at the Newman Center. So let me just say a few thanks, importantly to people who made both this program today possible, but all the work that we're doing possible. The Bonfils Stanton Foundation, it's been supporting international programming here and now at the Newman Center, a really important new grant, the Newman Center for Performing Arts. I want to thank Gary Stoyer, Gina Ferrari. I don't think they're here today, but thank you. Let me thank them publicly for their generosity. Today's talk, as I alluded to, is part of the Paul Taylor Dance Company's visit here, including a very sold-out show tonight. I'm told there's a wait list if you would like to attend. I don't know what your prospects are, but it's delighted to welcome them. The Taylor Company is here thanks to the generosity of the National Endowment of the Arts, the Greinberg Family Endowment for Dance, and the DU Dance Archive. I'd like to recognize the company's artistic director, Michael Novak, who's in the audience today. Michael, well, welcome. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors today, the Center for Immigration Policy and Research. Rebecca Galemos is director. She's here somewhere, so thank you. There's Rebecca. And the Guanajuato State Cultural Institute and the Cervantino International Festival. So many sponsors. Thank you all for your sponsorship of this and other events. And now I'm going to get out of the way. We have a wonderful panel to discuss the way in which dance can change the world. And so let me just introduce very, very briefly and then hand over to our panel. Francisco Graciano, assistant professor at Sam Houston State University on far right. Aisha Ahmed Post, who's the executive director of the Newman Center for the Performing Arts. Aisha, always lovely to have you here. And Marie Berry, my colleague, professor here at the Korbel School and director of the C. Chow Kang Center at the Korbel School. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it to you, Marie. Thank you all for being here today.
Fritz, thank you so much. I am really grateful for this beautiful attendance, all of you here joining us on this, I think, slightly unexpectedly chilly end of March day. And of course, to my two friends and co-panelists for being with us today, and for everyone else in the audience. This is such a treat and an opportunity to do something I think a little different in a School of International Affairs, and to think about, how and why the arts matter in really real terms, especially in this moment of great difficulty and a great challenge for so many people on the planet today. Thank you also to so many of my colleagues that are here. I'm so delighted to see you, and just to everyone else again for spending this noon time with us. So I'm lucky to be in this position of getting to ask some questions of our audience, of our panelists, and I will then be able to turn it over to the audience and give you all a chance to ask some questions as well. But just to get us started, I'd love to ask Cisco. We know you, and you're coming into this room today as somebody who danced with the Paul Taylor Dance Company for 13 years. And for those who aren't familiar, the Paul Taylor Dance Company is one of the most preeminent dance companies in the whole world. It's been an incredible leader in the space of dance and modern dance since, I believe, 1954, coming up on its 70th anniversary. It really just, has toured the world and has inspired so many dancers, including a little me. When I danced growing up, it was kind of the thing to aspire to, was dancing with the Paul Taylor Dance Company. So it's really a special treat to be with you here today. But I want to ask you, you were with the company for 13 years. The New York Times at one point called you a virtuoso star, which is pretty cool. How did that happen? How did you find your way to that career and that role?
Thank you, Marie. I just want to start by saying thank you all for being here. This is anytime I get to talk about dance or creativity and how we can affect change in the world is a huge opportunity for me, something very special. So it all starts on the south side of San Antonio, Texas. My father was Mexican, so I grew up with all the Mexican folklore. We grew up celebrating Day of the Dead every year. There's this, for those of you who know Mexican-American culture, there's this embedded machismo in the culture. So one day we were watching, PBS was showing something about Hispanic Heritage Month, and there was a man, he was dancing with a woman and doing all these impressive things. And I just remember spontaneously saying, I want to do that. I was 8 years old. And my father, who was the Mexican, he goes, you need ballet for that. And to have a father who is, it's in San Antonio, it's considered sissy to wear shorts. So to have a father who's born into this Mexican community tell his son that he needs to study ballet because he's attached to something or found something that he loves was a huge deal. So my mother enrolled me in classes. My first performance was the Aztec version of the Yaqui Indian deer dance, and it was taught to me by a gentleman named Carlos Alarcón, and he. His name in Mazatlan, where he was from, was Cuauhtemoc. And if you know who Cuauhtemoc was, he was the prince of Moctezuma. So he was part of that whole, the name, the historical figure. So immediately I started dance by thinking about nature, by responding to the earth and responding to what the sort of animal instinct felt like. So I was immediately connected to the earth. And throughout my training, I was training in ballet, and then I went to college and I got a BFA in dance, and I learned about Paul Taylor, and I thought that's amazing, and I'll never get to do it because they're amazing. And then I ended up going to New York right after I left college, and I was dancing with a company, and Paul asked me if I wanted to start with a second company in 2004, and I of course said, when do I start? Can I start yesterday? And I was with the second company for 2 years. And in 2006, he asked me to join the main company. And I was there until 2017 when I retired from his company. And for me, Paul's work, Paul's really a chameleon. Often people will go see a program. If you're there tonight, there is actually one piece that isn't Paul's, but often people would go see a program of the Paul Taylor Dance Company. There's usually 3 works on a Paul Taylor Dance program. And would always ask me at receptions, how many choreographers were on that program? It's all Paul. So what I loved about Paul was that he had this sort of classical thing about him that drew from my classical training, but there was this theatricality about it because at one point I wanted to be an actor, and there was this athleticism. And the thing I loved most about dance when I was a boy was that I wanted to be an athlete. My poor father coached me at soccer and basketball, but there wasn't a prayer. But I recognized that dancing was the most athletic thing that I had ever exposed my body to. So so that's my Paul Taylor Dance Company story in brief. Not brief, but as brief as I can make.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. And I think it resonates so much, this early spark, right? This 8-year-old you watching something and seeing something magnificent, not fully understanding it, how you get that trained, how your body probably is able to move in that way, right? But that spark that starts so early, I think, is one of the magics of dance and of the performing arts in general. So Aisha, you've been the executive director of the Newman Center. And for anyone in the room that hasn't had the good fortune of just, right there. I'm like, it's right there. Sorry, I got a little disoriented. But anyone who hasn't had the good fortune of seeing some of the outstanding acts and performers that come through the Newman Center, really, it's your homework after this event today. And Aisha has been really integral in curating much of the programming that the Newman Center offers to our community here in Denver. And I'm curious, for you, how did you come to that role and to that work? I know you have a background in college in music, and of course you have a master's in music. And so the performing arts and music has been a part of your life for a long time. Where did that start?
Did I screw this up? No, I didn't. Okay. I grew up in classical music and jazz, and I always loved dance. I had a friend who was a ballet dancer, and her parents would bring me to the University of Arizona in Tucson. They had something similar, the U of A Presents series, which in a lot of ways actually sort of informed a lot of the work that I do at the Newman Center. I would always beg her family to bring me to all of the dance performances. I actually saw the Taylor Company there and Hubbard Street and all these other places, companies. But I didn't really realize that that was a thing you could do, that you could be a curator of the performing arts. It was really sort of, the classical music training is very, you play the bass, you go to orchestra, you audition for an orchestra, and then that's kind of your gig for the rest of your life. And I was just never fully satisfied with that. I always loved what happened before, in between, and after the performances, right? The conversations that you'd have, and that sort of like magic frisson that happens, like those 5 minutes before the show starts and everybody's kind of excited, and all the talk that happens after the show. And I found myself really drawn to that. And ended up in arts administration sort of by accident. I was working, as a tour manager and an arts administrator with a classical music booking company that has long since gone. And I finally kind of found myself into the nonprofit world. And what I love about the Newman Center and what I get to do in this career as sort of an artistic and executive director is to bring all of these things that I sort of love, all these things that I've been sort of watching over the course of honestly, my whole life, and just being able to build those connections between these brilliant artists that travel the world and, get to build, choreography and new commissions and things, and then connecting them to what's happening at the ground level with a really local audience and trying to build those connections between the global and the hyper local, thinking about how those can inform each other, how what's happening here in this room in Denver at the Newman Center can inform what happens with, a company like the Taylor Company, and how those individual connections between artists and audience can transform the way that we think about ourselves here in Denver. So that's sort of in my trajectory. I didn't really, I feel enormously privileged and grateful to have that opportunity, because it's something that it just really makes me very happy to do.
No, I think that's wonderful. When we were coming up with the theme for this event today, we very boldly selected this title of Dance to Change the World, right? We were being a little bit, I think, rambunctious, if you will. But I actually think that we all fundamentally believe at the core that dance does and can change the world. And I'm wondering, Cisco, if you can tell us how you see that happening, and how throughout your career and in your life as a dancer, and then in what you've been doing since leaving the Paul Taylor Company or retiring, you've seen dance work in ways to change things, to help us learn, help us grow, help us connect with each other.
Yeah, art, I believe, in general, is never an isolated affair. You're always in dialogue with your past mentors, your future self, the work you're actually creating and working on. But that fact is 10 times more true, if you will, when you're working with dance, because dance is a community art form. Even if you are dancing a solo, you're probably, even if it's choreographed on you, or you choreograph it on yourself, there is a community. You're sharing something with an audience, or you're sharing something, an experience with dancers on stage. So I always tell my students, this isn't, it's not a programmatic sort of training that we're doing. We're working, we do these exercises where we dance together, because I want them to remember that we're here because dance is a collaborative art form. That being said, there's also this, as a dancer, and I'm also a choreographer, you have to be so aware of your body. And I think that the mind and the ears, there's this misconception, I think, that the mind and the ears take in information, but we take in information with our whole bodies all the time. You're doing it right now, actively. You may not realize it, but you are. And the more we can tune in to that body that's full of information, either letting information out or absorbing information, it's a constant stream. The more we can get in tune with that, the more we can connect with others. And I think for me, that's the most important thing that's come up in all of this collaborative work and all of this creative work. There's a sense of compassion that it breeds when you're fully aware of your own state. When you can then, there's a muscle that you're building, and a skill that you're building, so that you can key into someone else's So first you got to be in your own body. You got to listen here first. So that's where I see a lot of that happening. And that's why I think dance is capable of changing the world. We have to listen with our whole bodies to each other. Listening, I'm reading Rick Rubin right now, and Rick Rubin says, listening is suspending disbelief. I had to explain that to someone recently. And I was like, well, just don't formulate an opinion, just listen, sit back, but listen with your whole body is where the step that I take it a little bit further.
So just to kind of build on that, some of you who have heard me talk about my work, I work a lot with women who have survived war. And the constant across so many different cases, so many different contexts, is that trauma and exposure to different forms of violence separates us so quickly from our bodies. We get disconnected from being rooted in our corporal form, right? And I think what you just said was really powerful, right? That something about dance requires us to reconnect with our bodies, and that in reconnecting to our bodies, it opens up the possibility of connecting with other people's bodies.
Yeah.
So what do we learn from that? Like, where do we take that? What does that teach us?
I think it teaches us compassion. I think it teaches us that, you know, I can talk more about it in a minute, but when I was working in Mexico last year on this thing called the Bach Dance Project, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, that we're more alike than we are different, but our differences can be they can be celebrated, and when they're celebrated in a setting where like a stage where it's sort of elevated, we're allowed to see bodies different from us. And I think it gives us, there's something about that keying in that gives us like we can connect kinesthetically to another body. So we see ourselves, is what I'm trying to say, essentially, in other bodies who are from different cultures, who are practicing different ways of living in the world, inhabiting the world.
Well, I think there's also, sometimes I find that when I talk to folks who are new to watching dance, right, that there's sort of this fear that, like, oh, I don't get it, right? That there's this sort of barrier of knowledge that you have to overcome to enjoy, ballet or modern dance, or honestly even classical music, right? But I think that there's also that what you talked about, that suspension of disbelief, right? That ability to sort of sit with that uncomfortable feeling, or that feeling of not knowing, and being able to sort of take in that experience, that I think is really, if you're willing to give yourself over to that, I think is really powerful, because then there's that opportunity to sort of understand a little bit more about what that body is expressing, or what that person is expressing. And then it allows for that connection, even if it's very small, to be made kind of beyond one's own knowledge and learned experience, right? That ability to sort of say, like, maybe my body can't do that, maybe I don't have that, but I can sort of feel within myself what that might be, or what that might feel like, right? To be able to kind of transcend a particular feeling or emotion through movement, I think is something that is inherent to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, when I've seen Ballet Folclórico de Mexico, for instance, I walk out, I feel more grounded. I feel closer to the earth, literally closer to the earth. I feel my ancestors, right? There's like this whole lineage, and all of that informs who I am and how I inhabit space. And I think that's extremely important. It's a powerful act of vulnerability, this being able to receive, sit back, shut it, and suspend disbelief.
Absolutely. You mentioned, you've mentioned the Bach Dance Project, and I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about that, and hopefully connect it also to this recognition of kind of what our bodies are enabling in terms of conversations? What sort of conversations have been made possible by the Bach Dance Project that you've been so kind of focused on bringing to life?
So the Bach Dance Project was a collaborative work with the Paul Taylor Dance Company and the State Institute of Guanajuato, the Cultural Institute of Guanajuato, and the Cervantino Festival. So if anyone knows, the Cervantino Festival is hosted in Guanajuato, Mexico. It's the most important Latin performing arts festival in the world. So Taylor, Cervantino, Guanajuato, they wanted to exchange. They wanted to have a moment of exchange. What does that look like? And I was invited to visit Mexico and teach some Taylor classes and create a work that was set to Bach music. And part of that is because it was during we were rehearsing during the Bach Festival, which is also hosted there. But also because Paul Taylor he's really well known for the works that he's created to Bach's music. So the conversation was to sort of, the project was to sort of bring in who is Paul Taylor, what is Paul Taylor, and Bach, and what is the relationship there as it relates to where we are right now in Guanajuato, Mexico. And we ended up creating a 50-minute work that premiered at the Bach Dance Festival with 6 dancers from Guanajuato. And these were dancers who are pretty raw training and sort of what we would consider raw training, but had a significant wealth of information and creativity in their bodies. And so I was, my question was like, okay, where's the intersection of these 3 entities, and how do I bring that out into a choreographic work? And at the same time, celebrate this whole thing, particularly Mexico. As you can sort of tie in my background, this becomes also very personal to me. So the prompts in order to choreograph, I asked dancers to write down. It's this exercise I give to usually a cast of dancers whose discipline I'm not really familiar with. And I say, take a piece of paper, write down all of your movement lineage. So karate, swimming, running, ballet, jazz, tap, anything else. And I call it a corporeal history exercise. You make a list of these things, and then you go through and you quote everything. So if it's karate, you take one stance of a kata, and the next thing is swimming. So then you do maybe like a breaststroke, right? So you order all of these together. But what's so revealing about this project, and by the way, I have to give credit to Jawole Willa-Jazal, our artistic director of Urban Bush Women. She was my professor in grad school who taught me this exercise, and I kind of took it into a little bit more places. But what's revealing about this exercise is that you figure out what people are passionate about, because they selectively choose what they want to represent on their bodies. And sometimes it's this sort of sentimental feeling, like, yeah, I used to love doing karate, or I used to love doing capoeira, but I never do it anymore. So they bring it into their movement phrase, and it's incredibly revealing of their culture, of what they like, because a lot of these dancers, most of these dancers that I worked with, the 6 dancers that I worked with, had a folkloric background, and they're living in Guanajuato, which is gorgeous, a stunning place with a lot of history. It's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. No, so they're bringing their ancestral knowledge that's in their bodies, and they're informing the work. So then we have these phrases, and then we kind of build from there, and it builds these really healthy conversations about who we are, and we use this word a lot, but like how we inhabit space and why it's important.
I mean, I think that sounds remarkable, and it it's an exercise that in some ways I'm tempted to think about how to adapt it into how to adapt it into my own work and my own research. Can you tell us what the reception was and what did it mean to perform at Cervantino for those dancers?
Oh, it was incredibly important. I mean, this is a festival that they're familiar with from, when they're really, really young. But they were allowed to, and I encouraged this just as Paul did, and this is where the intersection comes in. I allowed and I wanted to see their individual selves celebrated on stage. I wanted to see their culture celebrated on stage, and I wanted them to really, and I wanted to be really transparent about that. So I saw a difference. There was a really impactful empowerment that they had and an ownership over the choreography, because they knew that they were reflecting on literally on the landscape. A lot of phrases we came up with were based on the landscape that we saw. And so they had a chance to celebrate and show, this is who I am, this is who we are celebrating us together as a community. And on this really important, in this really important festival, on this really important stage to live music. And it's just amazing, an amazing feeling. And I sense that this may be me playing favoritism, but I sense that, I follow a lot of them on Instagram, and I sense that there's this empowerment has grown even more in them, and that there's even a grander sense of ownership and confidence in who they are, and that they're valued as they should be.
Well, I think there was also the piece about capacity building, right? That when we talk about cultural diplomacy, we're usually talking about, you bring a company in from another country and they come in and they perform, and that's nice, and everybody sort of passively receives this information, right? But that true cultural diplomacy really involves the building of capacity, right? That you're creating new ways of knowing or learning, whether that's through language acquisition, or in this case, right, through choreography and technique. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this is one that they were empowered through that, but then also the ability of individuals to kind of work together, right? The fact that, it didn't have to be the entire company going to Guanajuato and performing, and then, these master classes are sort of, on the side, and you kind of have to fill them, and, that it's secondary to the performance. But really that the creation process, that the learning process was essential to the practice, and that it actually was even more important than the final product, right? That you could have this exchange of ideas and the collaboration that you created within that room between the dancers and you and the musicians, right? That there was this sense of everybody sort of having something to gain from all of this, right? That I thought was really powerful. And again, that it's sort of this cross-border situation.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding me to talk about process, because I think it's really important. I think in this country especially, we're so focused on product, the end product, the end thing. We have to come up with this thing, right? And we forget about the process, and that the product is really just an outcome and this sieve that is about the process, and the process is so important. And it was reciprocal. I got a lot out of working with them, as much as they maybe got out of hopefully getting something from me. But I understood. I began to understand the value of process, and as a living person on planet Earth, I'm always in process. I'm always at work in process, and I think we all are to some extent. And that's another way of sort of recognizing how I think how dance can change the world. That this is even when something is finished, it's finished. It's still in process. It's out there. You've released it. There's conversation. There's discussion. There's anger. There's
Well-
oh yeah. Oh,
Oh.
well, geez. I was going to say that we had this conversation a few weeks ago about this process, right? And it resonated for me as a researcher in really profound ways, because I think the academics in the room, we have this strong pressure to publish and to have these outputs. That's how we keep our jobs. That's how we're recognized by our disciplines. We write books, we have peer-reviewed publications. But oftentimes what's missed is the real work, the relational work, and the kind of really the praxis that one embodies on a day-to-day basis to do research that is impactful in the world. And it helped me reflect on, what if we had a slightly different set of disciplinary expectations where the process was rewarded, a process that was just, a process that was inclusive, a process that was equitable, right? That these might be values that we can learn, and take to our own academic research processes, which are so important and oftentimes invisible at the book launch,
Well, and it's also, it gave me a lot to sort of chew on in terms of the Newman Center, right? About what is my role, in all of this? Like, how can I help build opportunities in space for process, for the creation, and what is that, because so often we talk about it in terms of success, right? I mean, we're all thrilled, right, that tonight is totally sold out and it's this beautiful, sort of finished product. But at the same time, there's just so much there that you all don't get to see, right? In terms of that research, that sort of kinesthetic understanding and the connections that are made and all of those things that go into creating this finished work, that I find for me is like so intellectually satisfying, right? Like that's the piece that I love. I love going to the Guggenheim's Works in Process, right? And seeing that and having those conversations and understanding where an artist is coming from and how they came to those decisions. And I think that was something that was really powerful with the Bach Dance Project, because you could feel that in Guanajuato. It's a very Baroque town, in terms of its architecture, in terms of its legacy of Spanish colonization, and the role of Bach itself, right? And the colors that were chosen, on stage, and how that reflected the paint of the town. I mean, like, all of that sort of came to be, but I don't know that I would have necessarily had all of that richness of that experience if I hadn't physically been in Guanajuato for that process.
That leads me, Aisha, to ask kind of a question to you, Cisco, about the stories that came out through that process. What you just mentioned, I think, is important. We oftentimes in the news are reading stories about Mexico, I'm reading about femicide rates, right? I'm reading about the kind of policies of the administration to the Remain in Mexico policies, people seeking asylum in the United States that are sent back to wait in Mexico. I'm reading about, these kind of stories of hardship or of suffering or of, migration, this kind of massive kind of crisis, as people say, of migration, right? Which is, of course, not a crisis of migration. It's a crisis of many other things, including from neoliberal economic policies to a long legacy of kind of colonial interactions in the Southern Hemisphere. And I'm curious about what dance and what the type of dance that was created and possible through the Bach Dance Project meant in terms of disrupting some of those stories, or of centering other stories and other kind of histories of the place and of the people in the place.
Let me see if this example will sort of answer your question. So there's a section in the work that was inspired by I've been thinking a lot about motherhood in the last few years, and single motherhood especially, because March 2020 happened. We all have a fun story about that, right? And I went to go live with my sister, who is a single mother and a nurse. And I saw the work and the dedication and the selflessness that she lived every day. And I kept thinking about like how important this was in my relationship with my own mother. But then I go to Mexico, and I'm in Guanajuato in the summer of last year, 2022, and mothers with their children, one on their backs, one on their fronts, holding a hand, another one trailing behind them. I mean, all over the place. And I remember this actually when I would go visit my family in Mexico when I was growing up, that the mothers had such a burden on them to be there all the time. And I mean, but selflessly, of course they would, right? It wasn't a burden to them. This is what their love manifested into. And I just think that's incredible. And I at the time, you know, there was like talk in the dance industry about, you know, can mothers go back to dancing? Can mothers have a child and then go back to dancing? And can a pregnant woman dance? All these questions were coming up. And so I wanted to show that on stage. So I had a woman just walk across the stage with the rest of the cast trailing behind her. But I think that moment is present everywhere. I think we all sort of recognize we can see our mothers, or mothers can see that, maybe see themselves in it. And again, for me, it was this moment of look how similar we are. Look how much we all love our children and will do anything for our children. I don't have kids. I have nieces and nephews, but I know by proxy what the experience is like. So did I get there?
Yeah, and there's something about the language, right, that dance affords that isn't that's everyone can understand, right? You don't need a translator when you're watching somebody dance, right? So it allows these bridges to happen, this kind of connecting across these boundaries of language, of context, of culture, of distance, right? And this, I think, invites, you know, a little bit of a broader perspective, right? Like, how do we take what you've been working on and the Bach Dance Project and the stories that emerged from that? How do we think about the importance of, you know, these ways of connecting through bodies, right? Through performance, through music, through the arts? What do they offer us in this moment? Right. In 2023, at a moment in which there is so much crisis in the world, right? What potential do these kind of alternative modes of storytelling offer us?
I'm going to take a stab at this. Go for it. Yeah. You know, I think one of the things that I'm most drawn to at this point when it comes to bringing stories from around the world, right, is finding that way to hold up, you know, we talk a lot about this in our education framework, but about windows and mirrors, right? That we can hold up a mirror to our own lived experience of what does it mean to, right, what is sort of universal in these experiences, whether it's, you know, coming out of war and genocide and trauma, or joy and resilience and family and all of these sort of shared, you know, universal human emotions. Right. The fact that there is something really powerful about being able to have those moments. You know, I'm thinking a lot about next year's programming, which we'll launch in about a month here. But I've been thinking a lot about what are those stories that we can tell that maybe are often implicitly or explicitly excluded from the normal storytelling that happens on stage. And then who do we bring to the fore? Who can we amplify and give voice to and give space to that that hasn't been heard from and yet gives such a vital moment? You know, I remember presenting the work of Bill T. Jones, right, in Colorado Springs, which, you know, has had a whole lot of anti-LGBTQ sentiment and a number of other very difficult political issues there, right, with religious extremism and all those things. And just having even that one moment of this young queer student that we had at UCCS, just feeling like she saw herself on stage through this work letter to my nephew. And so just like that individual, right, that ability to be able to tell somebody's story in that way, even if it's that one-to-one, right? You don't have to change every single person's thoughts and minds and hearts, right? If you can find ways to engage with small groups of people in profoundly impactful ways, that is the real work, right? I think that's the work of the activists that you work with, Marie, but it's also the work that we can do as artists and people in the arts field. And so I think that is really essential, but then also the ability to tell, to find ways to connect to what's happening again in the city, right? Like when we bring artists from Latin America, right? And being able to have those conversations with people who are from those countries and being able to sort of amplify and sort of, I guess, sort of affirm their experiences is also really important to me, right? And it's not at the exclusion of people who don't have those lived experiences, right? I think a lot of the people in this room are also really hungry and eager to understand and learn about what life is outside of their own lived experience. And that is something that we can really do through the work that comes on tour.
I think that's so powerful. I was sharing with Cisco and Aisha earlier that I was just for the last 2 weeks in Kathmandu, Nepal, with a group of activists from 44 countries around the world, 80 activists. And these are activists coming out of contexts like Venezuela that has been, dealing with a massive migration of millions and millions of people due to economic devastation and without even political violence. It's triggered the mass kind of exodus of more than 6 million people. Activists coming from Uganda, which just passed one of the most draconian and horrific anti-gay pieces of legislation in modern history. These are activists that are wondering how they keep working in contexts of great repression. And they're facing repression not only kind of systemically and socially, but in their individual experiences and lives. And the arts kept coming up as a way of thinking about spaces to find ways of hanging on to values of inclusion, of justice, right? Of the celebration of all bodies, of these different, I think, very powerful expectations that we so quickly, I think, in these contexts of great difficulty, get erased so easily. And so I'm curious to hear from you, Cisco, as well, like what you see as as the importance of the type of work you've been doing going forward, right? And in this moment right now in the United States, that also has, we were speaking last night about the difficulties of continuing doing theater work in states in the United States that are putting bans on trans people, right? How do we continue performing Shakespeare in places that are not allowing for this expression, right? This is a real question that is actually, I think, on a lot of artists' minds at this moment.
And I think questions are the most important thing, at least in my creative work. I try to lead with a question, and I'll tie it back to Paul for a second. So Paul Taylor. So there's a dance called, he made a dance called Banquet of Vultures in 2006. Yes, I got it right. 2006. Director is clapping for me. So there's a dance called Banquet of Vultures, and there is a main protagonist in the work, and there's a way that the dancer who plays that protagonist has to embody that role. And when you are when you're tuned in to this corporeal instrument, this body, you can practice. You have a way of practicing stepping into these roles and into these personalities. And when I first saw the dance, this is when I was in Taylor too. When I first saw that dance, I knew exactly who that person was in the political landscape. because of the way the dancer, Michael Trostovek, embodied that role. And Paul didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to, give you any cheat sheets or notes or anything. He gave you a title. That was it. And he plays some music, and and then the dance is on.
Wait, can I ask who was it? Like who did that?
Oh, you want it? Can I say?
Yeah. I mean,
Well, Paul said it actually. It was George Bush in his regime. So yeah, I remember watching a conversation about Paul talking about it. He goes, well, it was Bush. So
I mean, mid-Iraq war. I mean,
mhm.
and that makes a lot of sense. So.
Yeah, but I think it forces you to sort of ask the question, like, how do I feel about this dude? Like making these decisions. How do I feel about the next dude who steps into his place? Dude is a technical term I use as a university professor. So, I think it makes you ask questions. What am I looking at? And I feel horrible about this thing. I don't like this person. And maybe I have no research on this at all other than my own creative mind, but maybe that recognition and that experience will you'll start to recognize a pattern in the way other people embody space. Just a politician, a dancer, a teacher, anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something so important about the commentary that art can convey. I was reading in the New York Times last week that on the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Yo-Yo Ma ended a performance, I believe in New York, with a piece that's not normally in his repertoire, but a piece that is an old, I think, Basque anti-war song, kind of from the Spanish Civil War, if I'm remembering this correctly.
Because that was a song that Pablo Casals used to play as an anti-war sentiment as well.
Exactly. And so it offers us this possibility, I think, of finding a chorus, of finding a language for a particular set of urgent issues and emotions, right? That operates outside of perhaps the realm of international politics that so many of us in the room are oftentimes speaking within, that of the policymakers and that of the, talking to the diplomats and trying to, get across to the NGOs. There's something different about moving people's hearts and minds and ultimately compassion, which is how we started this whole conversation.
Well, and there's often this whole dialogue that happens anytime art becomes overtly political, let's call it, right? Last year when they started canceling all of these Russian opera singers and Netrebko and all the rest of these big sort of dramatic moments of orchestras and opera companies sort of taking these stands against folks who couldn't necessarily speak out against Putin, but because they hadn't, right, were suddenly removed from these contracts, and it created this whole very sort of interesting quandary. But beyond that, inherently, this sounds very cliche, but art is inherently always political, right? The choices that you make to include or exclude, whether they're implicit or explicit, are fundamentally political, right? And they say something about the value of that artist. They say something about the value of that society, of that organization. And it is impossible to separate the two, right? And I think a lot of times there is that conversation about, oh, you should, maybe you shouldn't do this work, or you shouldn't have this type of person. But I think we lose a lot when we sort of self-censor ourselves in that way, because we aren't giving ourselves the opportunity to have those conversations about what that work may be signified, even if there's maybe things that we find problematic with it. Is there a way that we can sort of engage with those difficult conversations rather than shutting ourselves off altogether, because there's something to be learned from those moments?
I think that's exactly right, Aisha. And so let me ask one more question before I open it up to the audience and give all of you a chance to jump in here. But, in some ways, almost stepping back from that for a second. I remember when I was dancing as a as a much younger person. There was also something very unpolitical about it, which was the movement of expression of emotion, right? That very human emotion. Sometimes it was joy, sometimes it was awe, beauty, right? So I also wonder, and Cisco, maybe this is for you, like, what can we also learn, from dance that allows us to simply sit with like our full complex humanity and not necessarily think about, what it means or what it represents, right? Like, do you find that sometimes there's also just a real, kind of celebration of the physical form that comes to mind when you're in these spaces?
Yeah, well, I was going to add to the part that I was talking about earlier, that the inverse of all of that sort of intellectual reflection on who is this person and representing and what are they representing is that you can see some, like, the first thing that comes to mind is one of the pieces that's on the program tonight, Arden Court. You can't watch a dance like Paul Taylor's Arden Court and be unhappy. So let's do an experiment together. So get to the edge of your chair and I want everyone to just slouch. Like, pretend like you're sad. If this is uncomfortable for you, you can pass. All right, close your eyes for a second. I'm going to give you some words. Happy, joyful, ebullient, bright, sunny. Okay, open your eyes, shake it off, sit upright with a straight, lengthened spine. Okay. Close your eyes. Take note of your body. Happy, sunny, joyful, fresh, alive. Open your eyes. Which way felt better? The second or the first? Yeah, exactly. So we've just proven that where the body is in space and how it inhabits space affects your psychology and affects the psychology around everyone else, around the room. And so a dance like Arden Court is, for me, it's the celebration of ebullience. It's the celebration of the human spirit. It's the celebration of relationships, celebration of even competition and what that's like. So I think when we watch dance, it can't just be an intellectual figuring it out. Got to go in and, like, this artist is like throwing me one. What is it like to feel a performance in the way you just felt happy, sad, or whatever, right? What is it like to absorb that for yourself and just listen, as I was saying earlier, not with the mind and the ears, or in this case, the eyes, but with your body. What's happening to your body when you watch someone throw themselves across the floor with complete and utter abandoned joy? It's the most wonderful feeling in the world. The only other feeling that might be better is actually doing it. And there is a kinesthetic sense in all our bodies that we can feel that. And that's the gold that the dancers possess, performers possess. They can empower you with that. They can enrich your life experience simply by sitting in a chair. So, yeah. I'm on a soapbox. I can keep going.
I was thinking of two things. One, that's so beautiful. And two, that I was imagining throwing myself across the floor and it being extremely painful. So I'm looking forward to seeing that piece tonight, as I'm sure they will perform that with much more grace than I would. Let me turn it over to all of you. We have some time. We have at least another 15 minutes or so for questions. And so, yes, in the back. Beautiful.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having this conversation, and to Aisha and the Newman Center for putting this together. My name is Jose Rosales, and I'm the CEO of Artistico Dance Company, which is a local, soon-to-be international dance company here in Denver, Colorado. And a lot of the conversation that you had today is exactly what Artistico is trying to do in, I wouldn't say modern day because it's today, right? It's not modern day, it's today. But I do have a couple of questions, or one, I'm going to do one. So, because I could also do a soapbox too. So the first is you mentioned a lot about this whole experience in Guanajuato, right? So just a little side note, my husband and I both were soloists with Ballet Folklórico de México, de Amalia Hernández for, I was there for 5 years. My husband was there for 10. So we get that part and the impact, and we performed at Cervantino various years. And the show is honestly one of the most iconic shows that I can remember as a dancer. You talked about this experience of dancing with raw dancers, right? The raw talent that these dancers have. And one of the questions that I have is, when you're looking at what are some of the largest barriers for people of color in the dance world? Not in terms of speaking in the United States.
Access is one. I think there's a lot that these two could probably comment on and go deeper, but just politically, how we set up communities where we build housing, how we represent the BIPOC community in our movies, on stage. All of that can do a disservice, or it can promote all of our BIPOC people. So I think that's one of the main things that I see a lot.
Can I jump in here?
Go.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot recently is the way in which American art is often extractive, right? We've been having a lot of conversations about various American sort of creators who have gone to Mexico for inspiration, right? And then we sort of take, and then we bring it back, and we have this sort of unique American spin to it, which I think is not necessarily bad always. And there's also that element that my colleagues and I have talked a lot about of neo-colonization, right? About what that means. And last year we had a conversation about Latina artists in America and how they've been sort of exploited or exoticized, right? That there's this element there. And so I think one of the things that we can do is to build more opportunities for I'm going to use this word, and I understand that it's complicated, but authentic expression of artists from various countries, right? That aren't from the United States, right? That we create this opportunity to elevate those artists to be equal to and not seen as subservient to these companies that, due to power and privilege and money, have that ability to take space. And so I'm working with my colleagues, Cristina Vasquez and Michael Novak here. We're trying to think about ways that we could build more opportunities for artists, and specifically dance artists, outside of the United States to have that platform. And I think that trying to find those ways to remove those barriers will be essential.
And I think just to add on one more thing, I think we have to also start questioning people who are gatekeepers or people who are in positions of power. Exactly. Have to start asking the question, what's valuable? What do I value? And what do I want from my society? And if we want peace and we want inclusion and we want diversity, what does that look like?
Well, and it has to start with people like me, right? Relinquishing some of that power, right? I mean, like fundamentally, like, I get to make all of these decisions, and there's nothing that, nobody's telling me yes or no. But that's a fundamentally flawed like way of doing this work. And so how do you build more opportunities for different voices at the table? How do I make sure that, I'm in check, right? And really recognizing that and grappling with that issue of gatekeeping.
I think just that same question applies so much to the social sciences, around whose type of knowledge is considered legitimate and valued, whose expertise is deemed worthy of being at the front of the classroom, and it's a great invitation, and I think a great reminder too that the work is multifaceted. There's no silver bullet to kind of fix these systems of hierarchy, which have privileged, a particular type of expertise and knowledge and kind of downgraded others, right? It's very difficult, and I think it's very political and very important work in our classrooms as we design our syllabi, as we think about how we cite within the work that we do. Who are we citing? Whose kind of knowledge are we saying we are building from? Is it a canon that was established by a very narrow set of, largely white global North experts? Or is it a canon of lived experience and of broader kind of, expertise and experience, right, that exists beyond those kind of thin ivory tower walls?
Sorry, and that does connect to another question that I had. Sorry. So I did my undergrad at CU Boulder in the dance, or I got my undergraduate in dance. And one of the largest, and I'm sure Alejandro can say the same thing, one of the largest complications or difficulties was finding publications, right? Because when you're talking about the collegiate world or the scholar world, who gets to publish and also whose word is accepted, right, into the system that we have to cite from, right? Because there's a database that we have to search, that we have to use those publications. So you, Cisco, being in the collegiate world, what are you doing to change that? Because your position is so important in the community, and also as a person of color, as a Latino, what do you see and how do you see change in that aspect? And that'll be my last question.
I appreciate the question. Thank goodness. Sam Houston State has recently been established as a Hispanic serving institution. So I feel very privileged to be there. A lot of my work right now, I started as a tenure track professor in the fall, and a lot of my work right now is in choreography and technique. So when I'm actually in a technique class teaching, I teach from the Taylor style. Okay, we're talking about a white guy. Elephants in the room, and I'm a Mexican dude, right? So why is that important? Why should I be teaching a white man's work? Well, I have to start somewhere, and for what I value is that Paul encouraged individuality and wanted his dancers to dig into his work and really make it their own thing. And I think there's something to be said for, there is freedom in discipline. There is freedom in style. I've heard Shakespearean actors talk about how much freedom they find in one particular style and that they can transfer that to other things. So one of the things I talk about is like, okay, we're going to use these shapes. We're going to use these movements across the floor, but and here's a way to execute them. But what does it mean? What does it mean to hold your arm in a scoop? What does it mean to fall into your hip? What does it mean to connect with someone? And through that, they can go off and do whatever they want. I don't care if they're Taylor dancers or Graham dancers or whatever dancers, as long as they're holding true to their vision and, like I said, sort of listening with their whole bodies to their own impulses and their own interests. That's what's important to me. So I try to use the Taylor style, I call it a style because he didn't have a class, as an invitation to find your own voice, because that's how I found mine, or am finding mine. I'm revealing it every other work I make. Yeah.
Oh, Anne.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Marie. So I am involved with Flamenco Denver. I've been involved since 2005. I've been dancing, and I was a dancer as a kid too. I danced at East High School, and I began as a dance major. Then I had a bad knee injury, so I had to quit dancing. But I rediscovered dance as a middle-aged person in 2005, and we have a small studio on South Broadway. Thank you, Aisha, for partnering with us at the Newman Center. We perform just a little commercial in the fall over at the Newman Center, Flamenco Denver. But just talking about the process of being dancing. And we have a small company. We bring in guest artists from Spain and elsewhere. But a couple of things just about the process of being somebody who's, I'm never going to be, I perform in our little recitals, but never in our big shows that are at the Newman Center. But just how liberating and how important it is to be able to be out there with my colleagues, my friends, my really close community in the flamenco community. I have friends, we have somebody from Belarus, we have Asians, we have several people from Mexico, Venezuela, obviously from Spain, but we've become such a close community and we support one another. We laugh together, we cry together, we've lost loved ones together, we grieve together. We're there for each other. And just in the process of being in the studio and, stumbling over whatever it is we're learning that's really difficult, but we're all expressing the deep kinds of things that you were able to do in flamenco, which, that body thing. And when we're happy and we're in a show or watching a show, we're encouraged to shout, ole, we're feeling it. So if we're in the audience, we can shout that. We don't have to just sit there and be quiet. But I just, the process of being a dancer and not having to be so perfect that you are selected to perform a particular piece, but just to feel it and to have those, to be somebody like me at this age and being able to do that and being accepted for that and being with this family. It's just an exquisite experience. And for people that are shy about taking that leap, there are so many opportunities in this community to feel what it's like to move and to create a new community. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you so much.
And here's Carolyn.
Can I also just say really quickly, I love that that advocacy for the joy of amateurism, that the need to be perfect or at the top of your game is a really difficult one. And so I really identify with that. I really appreciate that.
Well, I just wanted to say that when I see dance, I'm just thrilled about what human beings can do. And it shows strength, it shows agility, flexibility, energy, and all of that. When I'm watching, I'm always astounded at what people can do. And that energy flows to me. So then I'm thinking, yes, I'm picking up on the joy that dancers feel as they're dancing. And it's just wonderful. What I'm wondering though, kind of a basic question, I feel like the tendons in my body are very tight. So I'm thinking, are dancers born and they're born with more flexibility or more potential strength, or do you have to learn and practice and you can get to whatever stage you want?
No, no, I am a perfect example of I don't have everything you need. No, I mean, the body is a miraculous thing. It's you can train it to do certain things. Obviously, there's going to be limitations depending on your training and where you are, and frankly, what you want to do. But yeah, and the body is constantly regenerating itself in certain ways. So there are ways if you're getting good training, or you're cross training. I'm also a gyrotonic gyrokinesis instructor. those types of methods and somatic methods can help you become a more intelligent mover and a more healthier mover also. So there are dancers, and how dance science has come so far also. I mean, being able to understand how the body can last, and dancers are dancing much longer these days because of dance science and all the research that's been done. So yeah, in short, you don't need the magical limbs and flexibility just to be a dancer. I am proof of that.
Thank you also just for those wonderful comments. That those were a great reminder too of how dance changes the world, just in terms of the way that we receive the joy of it. So
I have a sort of a three-part question here. Are you getting as much satisfaction being a choreographer today that you were dancing? And any choreographers that you admire today and why? And how do you go about getting your work produced or accepted at a dance company that you're producing choreography for?
Yeah, it's a big question. All the questions I'm thinking about all the time. It's a different kind of release. Creating a dance is it's a completely different experience. I'd say sometimes there are moments when it's absolutely agonizing. And there's the self-critic and the judgment is still there, but it's learning to accept those things. But it's a different kind of feeling. I haven't really worked out the vocabulary on how to talk about it, but yeah, it's a different part of the brain. It's I don't know, maybe like I can write poetry and learning to write prose. I don't know, I'm coming up with something on the spot. I don't know. But yeah, it's different, but it is extremely gratifying and fulfilling, mostly because for the way I've worked in the past, mostly because I see younger dancers feeling empowered. I see younger dancers execute something that they couldn't when I first gave it to them. And through us, coaching and getting them to sort of believe in themselves, that is just an incredibly rewarding feeling to know that you've given someone something. Feels great. And choreographers, I love Omar Ramon de Jesus. He recently made a work for the Taylor Company because he's utilizing his Puerto Rican roots and merging that with his contemporary and classical background and doing it so seamlessly and beautifully. Takehiro Ueyama actually is he used to be a Taylor dancer. He has a company called Take Dance, and he also I think consciously or subconsciously, he's from Japan, has a way of bringing in a lot of his Japanese background into. So people who can merge their backgrounds, their cultural backgrounds, and with their training, their classical training and where they are, that it's incredibly inspiring to me to see, because it's new, it's fresh, yeah.
We've talked about this before about your feeling of sort of like wanting to make sure that there's a good experience for the dancers that you're ultimately working with, right? And as you're building that choreography, and I think that, again, that sort of this really speaks to sort of this conversation about how the work has to be in dialogue, right, with the artist that you're working with.
Yeah. Yes. Leave it at that. And then getting work to other, to sort of establish myself as a choreographer. It's just a work. It's work. Just like you have to do the work of a choreographer, not just the creative stuff in the studio, but submitting work for festivals, connecting with organizations or schools. I have connections with a couple of universities trying to set work on their students and getting fellowships, things like that. And then eventually, hopefully just cold calling other directors and, hey, I'm a guy who likes to make dances. So, yeah.
I love that. So we have just a couple minutes left. So one last short question. Short-ish.
Hi, thank you. My name is Allie Elliott. I graduated from GU in 2020 and from Juilliard in 2017. Actually, Take choreographed a piece on our class our freshman year, so funny connection there. I guess to try to keep it really short, my question is about scale. So we talked about this person-to-person connection that happens when a company like Paul Taylor or any other comes into a community like Denver or Guanajuato, anywhere in the world. Obviously, there's that one-to-one experience that we can have both as an artist and as an audience member. And I'm curious if all three of you think that there is a next step beyond that. We talked about accessibility. How does the scale go beyond just one individual person having an experience to entire communities having consistent experiences where it's not just a drop-in from one place to another? And then how does that translate directly potentially into policies?
I'll take a stab. No, it's an excellent question. It's one that I think about a lot, right? Because I think fundamentally what you're talking about is having a really healthy arts ecosystem, right? The idea that Flamenco Denver and Artístico and the Newman Center and, the Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs are all sort of part of this thing that are that we're all working together towards a common goal, right? That there has to be, I think on the one hand, the Newman Center, for instance, and the work that we do helps to build that capacity and that expansion of being willing to receive new work and new ideas that are coming into our community, and that dance makers and artists and audiences that are based in Denver also have to create that space for themselves to be able to have a lot of different companies, a lot of schools, a lot of opportunities to talk about the work, opportunities for interdisciplinary work across genres, and that it's really important to show up for each other, right? And to think about, where's this funding coming from? Where are the audiences coming from? How are we making sure that there's space for these, smaller companies to grow, but then also helping these bigger companies to feel comfortable and taking risk and expanding what's available to everyone. And it's a lot of work and it takes a long time. The good news is that Denver in particular, because of, SCFD funding, this, 0.1% that you pay on your sales tax, we have a leg up on many, many, many communities in this country. And I think that actually means that we have to do a much better job because we can actually lead by example because we have the opportunity to sort of build all of this. And it's a really vibrant arts community, right? I think that's one of my favorite things about living here. And, there's so much hunger for those sorts of experiences, especially coming out of the pandemic, everything from Red Rocks down to, the Clock Tower Cabaret. So I think that's a really exciting part of it. And I think it just means that everybody in this room needs to do more to show up and be part of those conversations.
Yeah, showing up. I've talked about it already. My former professor, Jawale Willa-Jazaler, does a lot of community engagement work like this. And one of the things that I admire about what she's doing is that it does start to build this arts ecosystem, and from what I can tell, and one of the things that I'm actually a little more curious about right now is there's an organization in Houston. I live about an hour away from Houston, and where I teach. There's a Hispanic organization in Houston that does a lot of this community work, so we can have more vibrant staying power, if you will, with these arts ecosystems. And that's on me, and I know that, and that's just something that I'm cognizant of, and I want to really pursue. So that's where I am.
I know, I love that. And just, just to wrap us up, I think this question gives us a beautiful opportunity to also tell you what we're up to here at DU, which is that Aisha and I have really been scheming to really grow this cultural diplomacy program and to think about how we can create conversations like the one today that talk about cultural diplomacy, kind of at the community level, what it means to set a piece and to grow a piece, to choreograph a piece on 6 dancers as part of the Bach Dance Project, and also what it means to have those kind of interpersonal connections and kind of cross-border and cross-cultural context connections through movement. At the same time, the last kind of large luncheon event we did in the cultural diplomacy program, some of you may have attended, was with the mezzo-soprano singer Carla Canales in the fall, thanks to Anne Irving, who we heard from. And Carla represents the State Department and does much of this cultural diplomacy work, with diplomats and at a very high level, kind of in a very visible role. And I think the beauty is in the fusion between the conversations, right? Thinking about how this work of connection, of cultivating compassion, of bridging difference happens at all of these scales. And so what we're really excited about here is to think about how we can continue to grow programming around those conversations, about how the arts matter for social change and about how we connect across contexts through kind of the arts. And I invite all of you to stay tuned, because this is going to be a priority and really an exciting kind of set of programming going forward. So thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you, Cisco and Aisha, for all of your wisdom on the stage. And just again, a really quick shout out to the staff here that put this on, and especially the C Center staff, Shannon and Gergana, and the caterers and everybody else. So thank you all very, very much. And I will see some of you tonight at the performance.
Thank you.